Michael, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You
Thanks for
got
having me on.
sunny Nevada for you, so you got better weather than us. We're like 40 degrees and rainy. But I was joking to everybody that when I was a kid, this would be snow. So we're getting a couple degrees warmer every year or something like that, and that's turned snow into rain. But Michael, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you've been up to over the last handful of years?
Well, I am originally from New York. I've moved all over the place. I've really lived all over the U.S. I've even lived internationally. But
Hmm.
in a nutshell, when I was 15 years old, my dad was an executive coach. And he would bring me into the office and let me sit in on one-on-one coaching sessions he had with executives. And he was coaching them all in communication skills. He was an executive outplacement. So everyone he's working with had been fired, and he
Mm.
was helping them find their next job.
Was this his own firm, or did he work for a firm that was kind of what they did?
He worked for a firm, and that's what they did. And
Was the,
so,
was now is your memory that was kind of a unique job at the time? Because there's probably only so many people out there that do that job, right? And it's kind of
yeah,
interesting.
and the fact that it was in New York City, and
Yeah.
there was a lot of Fortune 100 companies there, they had the money to actually, provide outplacement to their executives and help them find their next role.
Oh, so it was
So,
the company that terminated them that's like, setting them up with a plan to land on their feet.
yeah, more often than not, yeah.
Yeah, if only some of our ex-girlfriends could have done the same thing, right?
Or the companies today. I mean,
Yeah.
today that
Well,
doesn't
yeah,
really happen nearly as much. But
that too.
so, in any case, I got to sit in on these one-on-one coaching sessions, and he was coaching these people all in the same thing, and it was in communication skills. So, they all had been fired for one reason or another because they failed from a communication standpoint. They were all technically good at what they did,
Mm.
but so I started to develop a fascination with what I do for a living then, because at age 15, I just couldn't understand why these high-level executives were getting fired for communication skills and how they could get that high in an organization and not have developed communication skills.
Mm.
And it's the same story. It's been going on for decades and decades. Companies promote people based on their technical skills. They keep
Mm.
promoting them. They don't give them the communication skills training they need to succeed as a leader. And then sooner or later, their lack of communication skills catch up with them and they end up getting fired. And so I started to develop a passion around what I do then. When I went to college, I started studying communication, and then I just kept finding ways to get involved in doing it. I kept working with my dad periodically part time, but I also took jobs that allowed me to get involved in helping people improve their communication skills and or their leadership skills. And for the last, 20 something years, that's all I do is I usually I'll find a company that is going through massive change because I feel like I can make the biggest difference there.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's a startup and I'm helping them grow into a larger organization. I've also worked for some really large companies with, over 150,000 employees and done the same thing. But no matter where I go, it's the same set of skills that are needed, just in different contexts. And so the three things I do the most, I facilitate strategic planning, I custom build leadership development programs, and I do one-on-one coaching with leaders at all levels. And I do a lot of communication skills training.
Mm. So take me back to when Dad was doing this. What year were you sitting in on these these CEO calls, these outgoing CEO and executive calls?
It was probably the 1980s.
Okay.
I would say, I mean, I graduated high school in 86, so it would have been, before then. And
Now, what was Dad's school of thought on this? Like, what was his prevailing methodology? And do you even know what was the prevailing methodology? Have you ever talked to him? Like, where did you learn this stuff? And what was your teaching to these individuals based off of?
it's so funny how careers take different changes. But my dad actually was a college football coach, and
Ah.
he taught at Williams College and at Columbia University. And when that part of his career was over, he got into recruiting, and he first took a job with Philip Morris in recruiting, and then he worked his network to eventually get to the point where instead of recruiting, he got into coaching, and then he started. I actually it may have been, and actually it was. His brother was my uncle was also at this firm that was doing the executive out coaching, and I think that's how he originally got in there. I think that was the case, but he had to learn on the fly. He had to learn very quickly. How do you help someone that's got poor communication habits or ineffective communication skills to get them to be effective in their careers? and not make the same mistakes in their next jobs, right? Because it was all about helping them be successful in their next roles. And the reality was, and this was his philosophy, he used the same fundamentals that he used when he was coaching football. When you're coaching, and he did offensive line and defensive line, so he did a lot of linemen, and he would teach them and drill them on the fundamentals of blocking or the fundamentals of tackling, and he was drilling them over and over to try to get them really good at the fundamentals. So now he's dealing with these executives who have been fired, and he's got to improve their abilities. So he did the same thing. He drilled them on the fundamentals of communication, and he did a lot of reading, and he did a lot of learning, and he just got better and better at it. And then he got really excited about it and developed a passion about it to the point that he wanted to bring his son to work with him and show him, how important this was. And so it worked. I mean, I developed the same passion, and for the last 25 plus years, I've been doing a lot of what he does, but a lot more than that now. I've gotten a lot bigger. I do a lot of strategic work, helping organizations figure out their direction, and then do a lot of targeted. Everything I do is custom built. I don't do out of the box type of things. I mean, I go in, I assess a specific need, and then I custom build something that meets that industry, that organization, that leadership's particular needs.
Mm.
And so but that's what I do for a living. I mean, I do the coaching, I do the custom building leadership programs for all levels of leaders, and I facilitate strategic planning. Those are the things I'm most passionate about, and I'm most skilled at. So.
Mm. Back when you were listening to those coaching calls, was Dad really leaning in on the old ball coach kind of thing, or was he just drawing on that wisdom? Because I imagine, back when I was coaching, football, I was doing it on the D line, and it's just like that. That's kind of what I'm imagining. Am I right or wrong?
Yeah, he would talk openly about the fact that he learned a long time ago that if you're trying to build, if you're trying to create a new habit, you have to work on it daily, and you have
Mm.
to use repetition, right? I mean, think about all of these executives that have been fired for one reason or another because they were failing at communication in some regard. So if you're failing in communication in some regard, it's probably because you developed a habit throughout your life, and that habit will not go away overnight, right? I mean,
Mm.
if you learn to communicate, and a lot of times it's family communication, right? So someone in a family with lots of kids, they'll interrupt each other to compete for attention with their parents. Next thing you know, they're interrupting people at work, and then they end up getting fired because they are interrupting their boss and their clients and things like that.
Mm.
So what you have to do is you have to raise self-awareness, and then you have to give them a repetitive way to replace the bad habit with a good habit. And I learned that very early on, just watching my dad do it. And over the years, he allowed me to help him facilitate leadership training. He allowed me to sit in a lot more coaching, and I just learned a lot just by watching him. And then eventually I got to do it myself. And then eventually I had enough background and experience at companies who let me do it as well.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's very similar to business, the way that I think about it. I encounter a lot of people that think, oh, I'm smart, I'm capable, so if and when I go into business, I'll be great at it. And I always use the old sports analogy. It's like, okay, you're an athlete. You know how to run, you know how to catch, you know how to throw. Have you ever played lacrosse before? No. It's like, all right, I'm going to throw you in on the varsity team. Go get them. It's like, well, I won't be very good. And it's like, okay, so based on like athletics, that even if you have kind of the fundamentals down, you won't be good. But like,
Yeah.
why would you like misperceive that about business, that like I'm smart, I'm capable, so instantly when I enter business, I'm going to be good? It's like, no, there's a learning curve, and you have to do this for a long period of time. And I like what you said about it's sort of a habit. It's a daily habit and a long history of a pattern that maybe, you didn't even realize you were doing.
Well, and companies contribute to that lack of self-awareness and or lack of effectiveness, because if you think about it, when people get promoted, they let's say you and I are doing the same role
Okay.
with 10 other people. The person they're going to promote from our team is the person who's technically best at what we do.
Yep.
And so what they do, they reward them by taking them out of their technical work and putting them in charge of people.
Mm-hmm.
Completely different set of competency and skills, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they don't provide the training on how do you manage people, how do you lead people, how do you be effective in developing relationships. So I could have been the best engineer or the best, you know, something in finance, any kind of technical work. And next thing you know, I'm leading people and I'm taken out of my element where I was great and put into an area where I have to succeed using a completely different set of skills with no training whatsoever. So a lot of companies inadvertently fail their people or their leaders by not giving them the right tools, resources, training to help them succeed at the next level. And unfortunately, the higher you go in the organization, the more dependent you become on your communication skills because
Mm,
more and more people are reporting up through you and you get further and further away from that original technical work that got you noticed.
right.
So it's been that way for decades. That's why all these executives that my dad coached back in the day were all getting fired for the same reason. And I see it even more now with AI and technical advances happening much faster. It's actually accelerating the rate at which people will get burned if they don't develop their communication skills.
Interesting. It makes sense though from a company perspective too. Like how how and why would I promote not the best person in this department? Like you just said, okay, we got 10 people in the department. We all agree that Michael's the best in the department. You know, he's head and shoulders above everybody else. We're going to promote Alex. You're going to promote Alex? Alex is like he's coming in late and like he doesn't always get his work done on time and like sometimes his work is a little shoddy. It's like why would you promote Alex? And it's like he's management quality. It's the old Office Space, right? Like they're like we think he's management material and they're like what? Him? Um but it makes sense like this like management material or like good at managing. It's like kind of this ethereal thing like I can't touch it. Like what is it? What does that mean?
Yeah, and the even when companies do intend to do the right thing by setting up like a high potential leadership program, right?
Mhm.
And I've developed a lot of them in different organizations. But when you set up a high potential leadership program, a lot of times you don't put enough effort into the how are you choosing who gets into this program, right? You just build it based on the skills you think people will need and whatever it might be. But if you think about it, more often than not, most companies when they pick high potential, they just turn to the manager and they say, "Who are your high potential employees?" And then they put them in the program.
Mm,
But they don't stop to think that it's not based on what their current skills are. It's
right.
based on the skills we're going to need them to be if they move into a leadership position later, right?
Mm,
And so they don't even provide criteria by which to decide who gets into the program and who doesn't.
mm,
And because of that, people promote either the people they like the most or the people that they think are technically best at the job. But that does not necessarily turn into potential for being a great leader,
mm,
and so there needs to be more thought put into what are the criteria to be in the program. Like, for example, it's not whether they're successful in their current role, it's if they were to move to two levels above and be in this role, how does their current skill set translate to that? And how quickly do they learn? And are they showing a capacity to pick up on things quickly?
mm,
Because it's about your ability to learn and adapt more than it is about your current skill set.
mm. Do you see a lot of companies also just like make it optional? Hey, we're doing an optional leadership training. Like, if you want to be a leader, Michael, you better sign up, kind of thing.
Yeah, and I find in general the optional programs. Look, I mean, you want people to take training because they want to take it, but more often than not, if you're looking at an internal training program and there's 20 people that sign up for it, if it's optional, you'll get maybe 15 at most to show up, because they other things come up and they just think, well, I could take it later and it's a free resource and things like that, right? So,
Mm,
but the reality is if you make it mandatory, then it becomes something you have to do as well. So I don't know that there's a right answer on that, other than to make sure that you're providing the resources and instilling in people a desire and want to learn, and then you provide the right learning resources, then it becomes more valuable. But reality, the best learning comes from on the job experience anyway. So,
mhm,
I mean, I develop training programs and I can really upskill people. But where it really becomes valuable is when they take what they learn in the program and turn around and start applying it on the job. And
mm,
then when it starts to work and not work, they learn from that. Right. And so that's where the real value is.
mm. You talked about the kind of technical acumen that helps you get promoted. Are there other things that help individuals get promoted that are detrimental to them being good managers?
Uh,
Like, oh, Alex is a real go-getter, or like, he's really assertive, or it's the old classic. Just because you're a good player doesn't mean you're going to be a good coach, right? Do you see things like that, where this really assertive person moves up the corporate ranks and then they get there and now they're just screaming at people and you're like, the skills that got you up here are not going to get you, to where you want to be as whatever executive.
Yeah, and I do a lot of work with personality tools, and
Okay.
I feel like if they're used correctly, they make a big difference in terms of someone's self awareness and skill. And I would tell you that people say to me, "Well, is there one personality type that's better for leadership?" Right? And I would argue that, and most of the tools have four core types of personality. And when I say types, it's nobody is just one.
Mm,
We're a mixture, but we usually have a preference for one over the others. So there's results driven people, structure driven people, people person who's very relationship driven. And the fourth one is usually more understanding driven or someone who's more, uh, I'd say, mission driven and purpose driven, right?
okay.
And so when you look at those four different personality types, all four of them could succeed at highest levels. The key is they would all have more likely mistakes they would make that would get them into trouble if they're too strong in one of those personality types. Like the results driven person, you could see them move up the ladder really quickly, but the same things that got them up there won't necessarily sustain their success over time. If they're very results driven and very focused on outcomes, you get to a point where if you're so focused on outcomes and not showing that you care about people, it could bite you, in the ass and hurt you later, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
you have to have an awareness, and that's why I say, any team really needs well-rounded representation of all four of those personality teams or energies rather, because if you have too much of one, that's where you're going to make mistakes. If you don't have enough of another, you'll make mistakes there too. And so the key is, as you move up and as you move along, are you understanding where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are?
Mm.
And are you building and leveraging your strengths, and are you minimizing your weaknesses? And if you do that well, then you're likely to be successful at the next level. But I wouldn't say that there's one thing that's going to cause someone to be successful or not. It's a matter of understanding yourself well enough and being able to adapt.
Mm. Yeah, I just took a Berkman assessment. You know about the
Mhm.
Berkman, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah, I'm familiar with it.
It was thorough. I mean, there's like I have like 20 pages of like stuff. It's so thorough that I can't even tell you like, oh, it told me this. It's like I got to go back and reread it. But
Well, but what you just described is one of the challenges. People, they do the assessment and they read it and they're like, "Oh, that was interesting," and then they go back to living, right? And they don't stop and say, "What are the 3 to 5 takeaways from this that if I apply will allow me to improve relationships, will allow
mm,
me to improve my results, and do I come away from it in a way that allows me to, like, if I learn from that Berkman or whatever tool you use, I use Insights Discovery a lot.
okay.
If you learn from that where you have vulnerabilities, are you leveraging the people around you to help you overcome those vulnerabilities, right? And so it's unfortunate that a lot of people in companies invest in using these tools, but they don't create the follow through that allows people to really apply them in a way that allows them to improve as leaders and in whatever areas they are.
So kind of with those assessments, you're using the assessment to tell you kind of, oh, Alex is deficient on whatever uh, process follow through, something like that. So then either A, that's a trigger to me that I need to focus on that, or B, I should hire someone who's like the executive assistant who's just gonna like follow through with everything. Is that kind of the way that you'd like to think about it?
Yeah, I think in general, when you are aware of what your strengths and weaknesses are, you can you can do workarounds, right? Like for me, my strongest, whenever I do personality tool, I'm always very strong in the relationship driven personalities, and I tend to be very good at establishing relationships and building trust. The area that I'm absolutely weakest in is structure. And so I can be structured. We all have the ability to leverage and lift and raise our level of each of those four different personality energies, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can be structured when I need to be. I'm just exhausted at the end of the day if I've been structured all day, right? And so for me, even when I was writing my book, I deliberately, I knew I was not as task focused and not as structured. So I found reviewers that were very structured and very results driven, and I deliberately sought them out because I knew they saw the world differently than me, and I knew they would find flaws in the book that I can't see as a people person.
Mm.
And they gave me lots of feedback, and the book got much better because of that. And so the same thing could apply within teams. If your immediate team doesn't have a people person on it, so to speak, is there someone at the next level down, or is there someone else you could bring in and get that perspective? Because if you don't have someone that has a relationship focus, when you roll out change or do things like that, you're more likely to make mistakes because you did not really take into consideration the needs of everybody.
Mm. So, what are the kind of pitfalls that you see for those four quadrants? We kind of talked about if Alex is just hard charge results, 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 like everyone around you might eventually be like, dude, this is too much. This isn't enjoyable. We can't, do this thing. They don't care about me. You
Yeah.
talked about structure. If you're lacking structure, you might not have the organization necessary. Talk maybe a little bit about the other two, if you could.
Well, yeah, and I'll take you through each one of them.
Yeah.
If you are, and the other thing to keep in mind is if you're too strong in one, you will make mistakes, right? And so it can be a strength, but in certain contexts, it could be a weakness. For example,
Yeah.
if you're results driven, you will get things done faster than other people. You'll be very good at pumping out results because it's what you're focused on. However, in the process of doing that, you may be steamrolling other people inadvertently because you're so focused on the outcome, you're not thinking about people consequences, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
If you are really structured, you may be great at logically laying out the path to follow and creating routines and processes and making sure that things are functioning in a consistent way. But you may not necessarily be as responsive to emotional needs of others, right? Because you're so, if you're more introverted, which is what most structure driven people are, and you're also focused on the process, you're not thinking about people and feelings as much. At least you're not showing it as much.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a people person, you may be great at getting people on board and getting them excited about a change, but you may not be good at rolling out the change because your execution skills are not strong because you're not focused enough. You might be jumping around and thinking of different things and doing what's fun. And if you're more of the last type I refer to as information driven, but it's really purpose driven. So for you, if that's your lead personality type, you're probably asking lots of why questions. Why are we doing this? Why is this important to the organization, right? You want to understand things fully before you move forward. So for you to make a quick decision, it may be hard for you because you want to do more research than others. So it may take longer for you to make decisions, right?
Mm.
And so you could go down the line and find things that could be potential vulnerabilities and strengths based on all the personality types. And it's really a matter about developing enough self-awareness that you know where you're likely to make a mistake and building a way to work around that. And you know how to leverage your strengths and finding ways to leverage them as often as you can.
Mm. You talked a little bit about where people pick up their communication tendencies. Can you just say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I will tell you the majority of the time when someone is doing something or developed a habit or a fear or whatever that's holding them back from a communication standpoint, more often than not, it's even pre-work, childhood, adolescence, whatever. The things that influence how we react to the world, a lot of times we get conditioned at a very young age to feel a certain way about ourselves, right? So if you had a critic in your childhood, as you're older and you're working on things, that little voice in your head that's telling you you're doing it wrong will sound remarkably similar to the critic from your childhood,
Isn't that
right?
every kid's childhood? All the kids are bullies, man. They're brutal. Oh,
Yeah, I
Alex
mean,
is wearing
yeah.
yellow shoes. That's so stupid. You're like, whoa.
And the more continuous something was, if you're continuously bullied, or you were in a house where arguments were really, really heated and didn't feel safe there, then
Mm,
you may avoid conflict in your work life because you had bad
mm,
experiences with it previously, right?
mm,
And so the key is to start to understand that when you have any habit, more often than not, it's an old program that you learned at a younger age or at a previous job or something where you had a bad experience. And that
mm,
program is limiting your ability to be effective because you are still acting today as if that was still true and it's in the past, right?
mm,
And so, and I call it a program because it doesn't go away. It just stays there until you can get good at catching yourself at thinking that way or doing that habit or whatever it might be. And once you get good at catching yourself, you could do something about it and you can replace it with a more healthy behavior or more positive thoughts. But you have to get good at catching yourself first. And more often than not, we're not even aware we're doing it. So.
It's funny you say that. I just had a gentleman on the podcast last week, and he wrote a book kind of just about that particular thing, like breaking these embedded like beliefs that we have. And one of them he was talking about is that, oh, all rich people are bad. And it's like, where does that idea come from? He's like, if I asked 100 people, I went up and walked up and talked to them on the street, and I'm like, are rich people good or bad? He's like, most people would say they're bad. And he's like, well, where does that come from? And I'm like, well, I don't know. And he's like, well, think about every movie. Who's the villain? It's like always like the corporate overlord. And I'm like, oh, that makes sense. Like A Christmas Carol, you got Scrooge. I was like, The Simpsons. Oh yeah, it's like Mr. Burns. He's like, he owns the nuclear power plant. He doesn't care about the citizens. He doesn't care about his workers. And he's like, yeah, Jaws. He's like, why don't they close the beach? I was like, I don't remember. He's like, because they didn't want to scare off all the tourism. They were making all the money in the city from tourism. He's like, Avatar. They're going to extract all the resources. He's like, we've been programmed from all the media that we watch, like from a young age and on, that like rich people are bad, they're evil. And he's like, that
Yeah.
just seeps in. And he's like, it's a self-limiting belief that now you have that like, if I get rich, I'm bad. I was like, oh, that's interesting.
Well, and it's interesting. I mean, all of that is true, and we are definitely conditioned by our society, and when you look at the things that influence the beliefs that we develop, right? So there's kind of three different things that contribute to it. One is kind of genetically how we're wired, right? And so we're born. Anyone that has more than one child will tell you that before they even turned one, you could see very distinct personality differences between them because we have some of that wired in us, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one influence is how we're wired just when we're born. The second thing would be more our kind of social, environment and or the things that the people that we spend the most time with,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, for example, our role models growing up, a lot of times we pick up the same habits as them in the way we communicate. Sometimes good, sometimes not so good, right?
Yeah, it's the old Charles
Uh,
Barkley. I am not a role model, right?
yeah, yeah. But we do, whether we like it or not, we absorb things. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to have the exact same habits as them. But for example, I'll give you an example. My mom was always really tough on herself. She was an artist. And at one point, she quit art because she thought her art was so bad,
Mm.
right? So I watched her criticize herself on these things all the time. Fast forward a number of years, and I hear myself criticizing myself, and I'm just like, I wonder, how much of that I picked up from watching it growing up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's things like that happen. But the key is to understand that the people in our lives, whoever we hang out with, are going to influence how we see the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the habits we develop in terms of how we communicate.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just good to know that who were the people and could they have contributed to that really good habit that you have or that thing that really makes you stand out as being great, and could they have contributed to helping you develop a bad habit, and what can you do to reverse that, right? Because it's a habit you learn, but it's something that doesn't necessarily represent who you are. And then the third area is really our experiences, right? So I've seen people that, like, one leader went into the military, had no appreciation for structure, spent 10 years in the military, came out the other end, and they really valued structure and looked for it in their life because they had that long experience of being in a structured environment, right? And then of course the sources we go to. I mean, look at what the media has become, and you have, ultra conservative, ultra liberal, and if you're not listening to both, you're going to be blinded one way or the other, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's just all these different things that factor into how we develop beliefs about the world. And the more kind of self-reflection you do and the more you consider that, the more you'll start to understand where your patterns are and where your opportunities are for potentially, becoming a better leader in general.
What are some of the really common things that you see? I don't even want to say like executive level folks, but just people that instantly when they get into management, what are like just the really obvious things that you see that they start to do wrong?
Well, I think in general, when people get into a leadership role and they have had no training, they're thinking of who are the role models in my past.
Okay.
And maybe that's the way you're supposed to be a leader. Now, it might be that the role model in the past had a crappy, leadership style or something like that, and they deliberately gravitate away from it.
Mm-hmm.
Or they see someone that they really liked what they did and they gravitate towards it, right? So sometimes they're just doing the best that they can based on their own role models.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes those role models aren't so great, so that's one mistake. The other thing too is when people get into a position of power, they think they have to have all the answers and they need to tell people what to do.
Yeah.
When in the reality is the most effective leaders, or the other thing they do is they make it about them. They're trying to show they're a good leader. So when their team gets results, they take credit for it. Or when their team does this, and it's all about me, me, me.
Mhm.
But the best leaders understand that if you do a great job of developing the people that are under you and they are successful at the next level, that's all a reflection of you being a great leader. And your ultimate goal as a leader should be to make your team not dependent on you or not need you.
Mhm.
So that if you go on vacation or you get promoted, that someone else can step in and the team will continue to function. So a lot of times the biggest mistake is making it about me and making it about your own ego when in reality the greatest leaders will always make it about developing their people and taking pride in seeing them being successful as opposed to making it about themselves.
Mhm.
So that's a big one as well.
Do you see leaders come in and try to make changes immediately and just like end up ruffling a lot of feathers because they're like, I need to prove that like I'm here for a reason and it was totally dysfunctional before me, so let me come in and change everything.
Yeah, I see that a lot, and that's another huge mistake because half the time the people that are still there are the ones that put that in place, and you're stepping on the feet of people that actually created the way it was, right? And so,
Mm.
what I always recommend is someone is when they step into a new leadership role, learn from everybody who's has visibility to that position in that team.
Mhm.
Talk to everyone on the team. Talk about what you liked about how they're doing. Talk about what's not going on, but create a full holistic picture of what's working and what's not from the team's perspective. And then at some point you have to, pull the trigger and make a decision. Okay, we're going to go on a route forward. But the degree to which you can get people involved in creating that path forward, you'll be much more successful than just saying, I made a decision as a leader and I think we should do this, right?
Mhm.
And so, but jumping in there and saying, I'm going to shake everything up, that does not necessarily create stability for the team. And getting people involved in it makes them feel like you value their opinion and they already start to see you as a great leader. So a lot of times, like for example, if executive takes over a new team, they'll hire me as an outside facilitator and I'll facilitate their strategic planning process because the CEO or whoever the leader is does not want to run the discussion. They just want to be there and let their team drive creating the path forward so it becomes their path, not what the CEO pushed on them.
Mhm.
Right?
A lot of listening up front.
Yes, you have to, because otherwise you're going in there with half information and you're more likely to make big mistakes because you didn't see the full picture and you didn't understand who felt how about what, right? And so it's one of those things that, and this is really, I mean, it's one of the basic fundamentals. And if you've not heard of this particular, there's this thing called organizational systems thinking or systems theory, right?
Mhm.
And it's based on the idea that you cannot make a change anywhere without it having a ripple effect on the rest of the organization.
Mhm.
And so when you run in there and just start making changes, you don't have time to anticipate and understand what the ripple effect is going to be and whether it's going to adversely impact other people or not. So if you're going to make any change, you should be running it by other departments, customers, anyone, so you can make sure that you're getting the full well-rounded perspective on, am I thinking of everything that this change may impact, or you could have a lot of unintended consequences.
Yeah, I got my thinking in systems here.
There you go.
Yeah, pretty dense, but very interesting stuff.
I would tell you though, I mean, it's one of the most basic fundamental failure points for someone that moves from being a manager to being a director or a senior leader.
Okay.
Because as a manager, you're being rated on how your immediate team is delivering, right?
They're the people who are doing most of the work, right?
Right. And so your criteria, your metrics, whatever you're being measured on is going to be on how your team is producing.
Right.
But when you get to the next level up, more often than not, it's not about how your immediate team is producing. It's about how are the different departments working together to create a better outcome.
Okay, got it.
And so if you're not thinking system thinking, if you're not thinking, I need to understand how what my department does impacts this department and that department and the sales and all these different things. I can't tell you how many times I've seen really like tragic outcomes that came from not having communication happen. I'll give you one example. It was a company that had a warehousing operation. They were grocery distribution, and they would supply a number of different grocery stores, and they had these big warehousing operations with lots and lots of perishable goods in it.
Okay. Yep. Sounds a
And when something
little bit
goes,
like us, actually.
yeah. Most of us should need to do a spring cleaning for that reason.
Mhm.
But in any case, when you think about it, every time you go to a supermarket, there's going to be something that's near the expiration date or over it,
Correct.
because they're not managing it or they didn't get it out of there in time, things like that. Well, if you think at a warehousing operation, it could be much broader scale. So in this particular warehousing operation, I don't remember the exact numbers, but we started to notice that they were throwing out a ton of meat, right? And it was just going bad while it was in storage.
Okay. Okay.
So we started tracking it. I was an outside consulting firm. We started tracking it, and it turned out they were throwing out about $100,000 worth of meat a month,
Okay.
right?
All right. That's
And
meaty.
nobody knew
Meaty.
this. Nobody knew this, right? So we put it in front of the executive team, and they're like, "What? Like, how is this possible?" Well, put it all together. You have buyers that were buying the meat, and they would get a great deal, and they buy a large amount of it.
Ah.
Then you have the people in the warehouses that don't know they have a large amount of it, and they're not putting it on sale or doing anything to move it. Then you have the people in the warehouse that aren't really talking either. So long story short, it came down to 3 or 4 different departments that weren't talking to each other. And if they were, the buyers would have said, "Hey, we just got this in, we should be promoting it." And then the people that do the promotions would have went to the departments and said, "Hey, you should do this." And then in the actual stores, they would say, "Hey, here's their promotion detail," and people would be pumping them. But there was just a breakdown in that whole thing, and the ultimate outcome was $100,000 of wasted food every month. So, and it
And
was an easy fix. Once they knew this, they started talking to each other, and they cut it down to a very small fraction of that.
and isn't it
So
isn't it funny that like the people on the ground, they'll just go, yeah, purchasing doesn't know what they're doing. They're buying all this inventory. We're just throwing it away. I don't know. I just do
yeah,
my job.
and if you don't train your people at the director level and above to ask the right questions and look at these things, they'll do exactly what you just said. They'll be like, "Well, purchasing is screwed up. I'm going to focus on my department," right? But what they should be doing is thinking, financially for the organization, for us to be successful, we need to be communicating together. And I need to know in advance when they make a big purchase so I can prepare to push it out the door at the other end.
Hmm.
And so that's a typical example. You could go into any industry, and I could probably give you a number of different examples like that. But when departments don't talk to each other and people don't think, "I have to understand how this impacts the departments around me," that's where you start to have tons of waste and a lot of just failures and conflict across departments, because later on, when they're not making their numbers, it's too late to fix it.
Hmm. What about anger and tone? This is one that I think is really obvious. I literally just had someone start this week, and she said, "I used to work at a restaurant," and I was like, "Oh yeah, like how was that?" She's like, "Oh, that was way more stressful." And I was like, "Oh well, I'm glad that you're enjoying it here." She's like, "Yeah, the day that I quit that job, I walked up to the chef or executive chef and I asked if the sauce was gluten free." And they said, "If you're so fucking stupid that you have to ask that question, like maybe you should just quit." And she goes, "All right, I do. I quit." And it was just like you know, look, I am not like a quick to be aggravated type of person, um, but sometimes you'll be at a store or a restaurant or something, and you'll just see someone get really upset. I remember pretty vividly. I was at Chipotle. I was getting a burrito, and I can't remember what happened. I asked for double meat or something, and then it got to the end of the line, and the young man punched it in as just a regular burrito. And his manager came up and was like, "You have to pay attention. I told you it's double meat. You got to listen." And just like kind of like screamed at him in front of all the customers. And she was a young manager too, so it's not like I hold either of them to too much account. They're not the CEO of Chipotle, right? But it's just like, do you really think that that's like an effective method of communication? Um, so how much do you see that being an issue with people that you work with or have
Well,
worked with?
yeah, and I think, what you're hitting on, and this is the higher you go in an organization, the more critical is you develop your emotional intelligence, right? And
Yep.
so, emotional intelligence makes up 4 things. It's self awareness of your own emotions and how you react to things.
Okay.
Self control, which is when those emotions kick up, do I have an ability to respond well and control them and respond to others well?
Okay.
Those are the 2 kind of self focused areas. Then there's 2 other people areas. One of them is social awareness. Can you read the emotions of others and understand the emotional needs of others? And then the 4th one is relationship management. So it's one thing to be able to read what they need, but there's a whole nother thing to be able to respond in a way that either calms them down or gives them what they need or makes them feel heard.
Hmm.
And so the research and Daniel Goleman is the one who created the emotional intelligence model.
Mm.
The research suggests that the higher you go in the organization, the more critical it is you need to increase your emotional intelligence. And it gets to the point where it's twice as important as your cognitive and or technical skills, right? And so it's twice as important as IQ when you get to the higher levels because you have to get things done through others.
Mm.
And so the example you just gave of that guy, flipping out on his employee in front of customers, right? That is a leader that is not very strong in self-awareness or self-control, right? Or even you could argue the other two because they certainly didn't help the relationship with the employee and they weren't socially aware of realizing that they were making the other person feel, embarrassed, right? So those are examples of what happens when someone does not have emotional intelligence and they're not, working on being better at that. And that person having done that thing at that day probably caused other people to quit too,
Mm.
because they're like, I don't want to work for someone who would do this to someone.
Or
Right.
at least
So,
put a black eye on the organization that everyone knows, like, this place is pretty brutal, you know?
yeah. So anyone who does not focus on improving their emotional intelligence as they get higher in an organization is setting themselves up for failure
Mm.
because sooner or later it's going to come back to bite you, or sooner or later your ability to leverage it is going to be what saves that one employee you didn't want to lose, or what helps you manage the crisis moment in a way that gained faith of your team and made them want to lead you as opposed to handle it in a way that made them want to leave, right?
Hmm.
And so it becomes more and more critical. And quite honestly, one of the things that I do a lot of teaching on is helping people learn to multitask less, because multitasking actually can hurt your ability to demonstrate emotional intelligence over
Okay.
time.
Okay. So, like, what?
Um,
Like, seeming to be preoccupied while you're with other people?
um, no, let me get a little more specific. So
Okay.
there's one study in particular. I want to say it was either University of London or University of Sussex. I can't remember, but they were talking about how when people are multitasking all the time, or they're in front of their phones and doing things nonstop while they're communicating with others, they show a reduction in their ability to feel empathy in one part of the brain that shows empathy, right?
Okay.
And so what happens, and they said the damage could be permanent, like if you are constantly doing these things, your ability to be emotionally strong reduces because your brain is becoming shorter and shorter attention span, shorter and shorter ability to respond to humans because it's getting engrossed in the technology or whatever else it is. But there's other studies that would say, multitasking actually causes brain damage. And when I say that, it does reduce your ability to stay focused. So if I have my
Mm.
phone in front of me and I'm talking to you and I'm constantly looking at the phone and I'm constantly doing other things and I'm trying to do two or three things at once, what we're training our brain to do is to stay focused for shorter and shorter periods of time.
Mm.
And like anything else, the more you expose something to something, the more it becomes conditioned. It's the same thing with your eyes. If you're looking at a computer screen all day long, you will actually start to hurt your eyesight. I had
Hmm.
an optometrist at one point tell me the best thing you could do is every 20 minutes, get up and walk around or start looking at long distances and changing your height, because your eyes become trained to just be, 30 inches away, as opposed to, so you have to keep alternate or else your eyes get trained. Your brain does the same thing. If you are only spending 1 minute doing this, then you multitask and your phone pings and you look at that instead of doing it, your brain is being trained to be shorter and shorter attention span.
Mm.
So then when it comes to times where you need to have long focus, you actually have a harder time doing it because your brain is looking for some other stimulation, right?
Mm.
And so I work with people on identifying what are their most common multitasking habits. More often than not, it's the phone, or even think about the browser on your computer. I don't care what browser you use. When you open it, there's probably like 6 widgets on it that are all designed to steal your attention.
Hmm.
Weather, news, something else. And what I do is I shut them all down. Like my browsers, when they open, there are no widgets.
Hmm.
On my phone, if it's in front of me, I'm going to start peeking at that thing whenever it pings. So I'll turn it off or put it in another room or something like that, right? Because I'm trying to train my brain to stay focused for longer periods of time. And all these other things make it easy when some pop up shows up. I tell people, change anything that's not vital to your work to a push instead of a pull instead of a push,
Mm.
right? So when you don't get notified when a news alert happens, you go look at the news when you choose to look at it because that's what you scheduled to do at that moment, right?
Mm.
And so the more you do things like that, the more you can train your brain to stay focused for a longer period of time. And there's a technique called, I think it's called the Pomodoro
Yep.
technique, if
Yep.
people look that up,
Hmm.
where you put on a timer. And for 20 minutes, you're not allowed to do anything but what you're focused on. And then you can extend it to 30 minutes and 40 minutes, and you can't have any other distractions in the room. And then you start to train your brain the other way, right? And you can reverse some of that damage that happens of us constantly multitasking.
And that, you say, actually makes people more empathetic to others?
That's slightly separate, and that study
Okay.
talked about. But there's a lot of research, and there's a book that talks in depth how too much screen time is damaging younger people's ability to be emotionally strong. And
I believe
and there's
that.
a couple books. There's a couple books out there that talk about that. And unfortunately, I can't think of it right now. I'm reaching for my phone to look at it, which would be multitasking. So I'm not going
Right,
to do
right.
that.
That sounds like
But
a Jonathan Haidt work. I mean, if it's not his, it's kind of in that area.
yeah, yeah, and you can go out and look for these, even do a research. Just go do research on multitasking and brain damage, right?
Hmm.
Or do research on screen time and emotional development, and you will find all kinds of research that will scare the hell out of you about how much screen time you let your kids have, and or how much multitasking you do.
Well, people have been talking about this a long time. The famous book "Amusing Ourselves to Death" came out in 1985, so that was a
Right.
really long time ago. Um,
Yeah. It's not new, but the amount of things that could distract you and ways to be distracted is dramatically higher than it was when that book came out in the
oh
1980s,
yeah,
right?
they were worried about like radio. It's like, come on, dude,
Yeah.
like that's not you know gonna distract me. Radio, come on. Um,
Yeah.
so, what are kind of the pieces that you utilize in reference for this? Like, what are the texts or the systems, or do you have like three or four different things that you like to use when you're working with clients or schools of thought that maybe Pops wasn't using? He was kind of just shooting from the hip or using the best information available at the time that maybe now you're using.
Yeah. And so the first thing I always do is I start out with trying to raise self awareness, right?
Okay.
And that's in all regards. What are your communication habits that work for you? What are the communication habits that don't? What are the personality traits that you have that really help you in your job? How do those same traits hurt you in your job? Same thing with which are the personality traits you lack, and how does not having them impact your effectiveness?
Okay.
And so I do a lot of things with self awareness raising, and then ultimately it comes down to applying the 80-20 rule and getting people to focus on the one or two things that'll have the biggest positive overall impact on their success in relationships or success in their jobs.
Okay.
And so it's different for everybody. But ultimately, what I'll do is I'll walk people through a process of helping raise their self awareness. I'll use whatever tools are available. If they've done an assessment in the past, if they've done 360s, if they have performance reviews,
Mm-hmm.
but I will get them to gather as much information that would help them understand if they have any patterns that are particularly helping them, or patterns or skills, or habits that are particularly hurting them. And I get them to come up with a list of possible things to work on. And then we'll narrow it down to the top one or two. And the mistake people make a lot of times, they try to work on 10 things at once.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is, of those 10 things, there's two of them that will get you 80% of your return on investment.
Right.
And you should be focused on those two. And then when you're done with that, or you feel like you've made enough progress, then you can look at the other 8. Right. But so really need to focus on bang for your buck. What are the few things that if I focus on will have the biggest positive impact? And then I will work with them on developing some way. You raise their self awareness first. Then, if it's a habit, for example, you help them get better at catching themselves at the moment the habit. And then you also help them develop an alternative behavior to use in that exact moment that they caught themselves. So if I was interrupting people and I catch myself interrupting people, the new behavior might be I have to count in my head to 3 before I can speak after this person's done.
Mm.
And I can't speak again. And you start to, make it harder for yourself to do that habit that's hurting trust, right?
Mm.
And so, but those are the 3 steps: raise self-awareness, get people good at catching themselves in the moment of doing whatever it is they don't want to do,
Mm.
and then giving them alternative behavior. And quite honestly, if anyone's trying to improve their communication, the habits you've developed have been developed over decades. So there's no way it's going to go away overnight. It takes daily focus, even if it's 5 or 10 minutes a day. you need to be working on it if you really want to make measurable improvement.
Yeah, an entrepreneur that I really like said something that I thought was really insightful. Alex Hormozy. He said, "I had this guy on my team, and 3 or 4 people had talked to him that he was just kind of an asshole. And eventually he got to me, and it was like, hey, this is kind of our last like intervention here, and we like you because you're actually really good at your job. But if we can't get this thing sorted out, then we're gonna have to let you go." And he's like, I just told him specific things that he was doing, like, hey, when you get on a call and you instantly start talking without any pleasantries, people think that's like an asshole move. And he was like,
Hmm.
he just went, oh, I never realized it. And he's like, I think one of the things that people misunderstand about behaviors is that they can be broken down into very small, tiny little um, elements where it's like you walk into a room, you smile, you say, hey, hello. You say hello to every single person in the room. Whereas when we meet that guy or girl that's like, oh, they're just, they just float around the room and they're so charismatic. He's like, I can break those. Charisma is just like a section of behaviors, right? It's just certain behaviors that if you exhibit, then people say you're charismatic. And he's like, I think I'm just good at breaking down those small behaviors for people so that they can understand what's either working or not working. Is that
Yeah.
kind of similar to what you're saying? It's like people think I'm an asshole when I don't shut up. So I need to make sure that when I speak, it's for less than 30 seconds.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, a lot of times a strength in one context is a weakness in another, right? And so
Mm,
I'll give a story I love to tell. I used to have a manager named Charlie who was I call him turbo results driven, right? He wasn't just results driven. He was always thinking, what's the next thing that needs to get done, right? And he would cut you off, or if you were taking too long and things like that. And I literally was telling him a story one day, and then in the middle of the story, I said, to make a long story short, he says it's too late for that. I mean, he didn't have any filters, right?
mm,
And so I'm a people person. That same strength that he had of being able to get things done didn't work great with me because I wanted him to be diplomatic and I wanted to speak to him nice, right?
mm,
But it also served him very well in other contexts because when he needed to say something, he didn't sugarcoat it. He said it, and we had to get results for our clients. But
mm,
I ended up confronting him one day on this, and I learned it was a big eye opener for me, a big learning for me because I talked to him about the way he was giving me feedback and his bluntness and how he was calling out, when the training wasn't strong in front of the team when we were practicing the training. He was doing it in a very non-diplomatic way.
mm,
And my whole thing in my head was I want him to be nicer in the way he gives me feedback, right? Because I'm a people person.
mm,
So when I finally confront him on this, Charlie says to me, you know what your problem is? And I'm thinking, my problem? You're the guy with the problem.
mm,
And he says, your problem is you take what I say personal. And I said, it is personal. You said the training was terrible or whatever. He says, look, it's not personal. The only difference between you and me is I say what I think and you filter what you say.
mm,
And I thought about that. And that's the main difference between a results driven personality and a people personality. The results driven person, if Charlie and I were looking at the exact same training and we both thought it sucked, Charlie will say that training sucked. And even if I thought it sucked, I would say, I see an opportunity for improvement, right? I'll find a very nice way of saying it. And so I hated working for Charlie initially. But once we kind of had it out and talked through it, and he talked to me about the difference, like that he's just not filtering, I started listening to his feedback differently.
mm,
And once I started listening to his feedback differently, I started learning a lot from him because he was saying the things to me that I needed to hear. He just wasn't saying it the way I wanted to see it or hear it. And so once I stopped judging the way it was being said and listened to the intent behind it, he wanted me to be successful. And he was being blunt in his feedback to make that happen. And it changed my whole perspective because now, 25 years later, I get more irritated with people like me that try to sugarcoat it. I'd rather
mm,
have someone give it to me bluntly because over the years, I've developed an appreciation for all feedback, no matter how it comes out of their mouth, because I know that all feedback is a gift if you do something with it to improve.
mm.
And so for me, that was a big turning point, and I started craving blunt feedback because I stopped taking it personal. And
Yeah,
so that's
there's
good.
actually a very similar story that you may have heard before between Steve Jobs and Johnny Ive. Johnny Ive had this product and he thought it was really good, and Steve came in and just tore it apart. And Johnny Ive goes like, dude, like, the way you're talking to me, it's like kind of pissing me off. Like I'm pretty upset with that. And Johnny Ives goes, after Steve said this to me, I had like a revelation, a eureka. And Steve goes, you care more about being liked than you care about the results of the product. And he's like, when he said that, I instantly said, shit, he's right. Because like I would not say the things that needed to be said to my team in order to make this product better. And Steve's like, I don't care about being liked at this company. And that could be to a detriment, right? He had his own, personal
Yeah.
flaws, of course. But he wanted the product to be best and he didn't care like how he had to get there, but he was going to tell people when this is not good enough. And I think that's almost basically a very similar story to what you had, where your friend was like, dude, I'm just going to tell you if it's not good enough or not. And it's not about you liking me. It's about us doing our best.
Yeah, and that is the difference between a people person and a results driven person, right? I mean, it's I'm going to bluntly say what I want to say, and the other person's getting caught up in the way it's being said. But we've given some examples of mistakes that the results driven person could do. Let me tell you a very common mistake of first time managers, that if they're a people person, they go into the role with a mindset is I'm going to be liked as a manager.
Mm-hmm.
Huge mistake. Huge mistake.
Mm.
It's going to cause you to not be effective as a manager. And I'll give you my first example. Right, the first time I was a manager, I was working in a hotel, and I was a manager. Well, it's not the first time, but it was one of the early management experiences. I had room service, two people in room service. One of them was crushing it. The guy could produce twice as much as anyone else on a team. He was focused. He was very results driven. He was knocking things out. The other person was regularly not showing up for work. And I'd only been working there for a month. I wasn't even fully aware how bad this other person was. But I know that when I was there, I was trying to be liked as a manager and all this stuff. And then one day, the really good employee that covered for people all the time hands me a letter of resignation. And I was like, whoa, what's going on? And then he explains to me how many times she's been missing work, which I had not even been paying attention to. And my boss hadn't been paying attention to either. She was also a strong, people person. I went down and I said, don't quit. Let me see what I could do. Let me look into it. I went down and I started looking at the records. This person had missed like more than 30 days over the last 3 months. And this guy had been covering because he's so damn good. He was covering for her and we weren't even aware that it was happening. Right.
So you weren't even seeing her off work. You're just like, I don't know. There's somebody here always.
All I know is that people were getting served, right? And they were kind of self-functioning, but I didn't realize that he was covering for her constantly, right? And I gathered enough information to be able to fire her the next day because she had violated so many, and she had been late a ton of times, and I was able to save that employee. He ended up not quitting, and I ended up and then we started paying attention to it. But at that time, I wasn't, I mean, I was so focused on trying to be liked as a manager, I didn't even stop to look at whether or not my people were performing at the right level, And so that's a mistake a lot of people do. They go in there and they think, oh, I shouldn't give that harsh feedback because that person, I could hurt them. But if you allow someone to stay low performing in a job, you're hurting them way more than if you give them the feedback that's going to hurt their feelings. Because the longer someone stays in a job where they're a low performer and they know they're a low performer, their self-esteem goes down, and you could be preventing them from finding a job where they may be able to use their strengths better, right? And so as a leader, if you can't hold your low performers accountable, your entire team's performance comes down. Because the people that are busting their butts covering for these low performers, they start to not want to do it anymore. So they'll start to come down to the medium level, or they'll just quit altogether. And they won't necessarily tell you because they don't want to burn their bridges. They'll just say, I found another job. But the real reason is you sucked as a manager and you weren't holding people accountable, and I'm not going to cover for them anymore.
Yeah, that one actually might be more pervasive than the manager who comes in and is way too hard on everyone.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I learned very quickly that, and my attitude has completely changed about being a manager over time, but I'm more about the result now than I used to be. I used to be more about the relationship. Now, naturally, I'm good with the relationship anyway, but I realize that to be successful as a manager, you have to be able to do all four of those personality strengths. You have to provide enough structure to have consistency. You have to be able to results driven to stay focused on getting the results in the time frames they're supposed to. You have to be asking the right why questions, and you have to be getting people involved and getting them on board. And so for me, it's less about being liked. It's more about what am I doing to make sure that I am doing all the things that a great manager needs to do in order to get great results from their team.
Yeah, I kind of heard this from Jocko Willink that really leadership is kind of balancing right in the middle on a lot of things. It's like
Yeah.
you need to care about your team, but you can't care about Michael so much that, like you said, that employee that maybe you didn't care about them, but like you were basically showing them favoritism, right? So it's like, oh, well, Michael's my friend. I can't yell at Michael. You have to be strict with your team, but you can't be so strict that it's like, oh, you're 12 seconds late and you're terminated, right? It's
Yeah.
funny. Sometimes my team, like, that's what they want. They're like, this person's late. I think we should get rid of them. And I'm like, okay, let's slow down. Like, this is, we're not in a world war. Okay, we're not executing anybody yet. So just being able to balance a lot of those challenging things where, yes, you're process driven, but also you can be a little bit creative and go, yeah, this is a unique situation. We're going to work on this a little bit differently. That's one of the things that I kind of try to coach our up and coming leaders on. It's really about balance and a lot of different difficult and challenging things.
Yeah, and the balance is interesting because there's a balance between being consistent with everybody and making sure you're not showing favoritism, things like that. And then there's also the need to recognize, and one of the things that I teach is situational leadership, right? And so the
Okay.
idea that you should not have a leadership style for every situation that you just use the same style. You have to adapt your style based on the situation.
Mm.
So for example, if someone's brand new to a task and they've never done it before, but they're very excited to learn it, you can spend a lot of time just teaching them the how, giving them direction and telling them how to do it. You don't have to be super supportive because they're already enthusiastic and excited.
Mm-hmm.
But when that person starts running into harder times and they start to struggle a little bit with the task and it's harder than they thought, now you have to raise the amount of support you give and help them by being more supportive and not just giving them direction. And so what happens is ultimately you're trying to get people from not knowing what they're doing to being skilled on any given task. But you could be in a conversation with someone and they're working on 4 different tasks, and you may need to use 4 different leadership styles based on whether or not they're first time doing the task or whether they're an expert in the task. Because if you have 2 tasks you're talking about in the same conversation and you're hands-on, but they already know how to do one of them, you're going to be micromanaging them.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's 2 tasks and they don't know what they're doing and you're hands off, you're going to be under managing them and you're not going to be giving them enough direction to be successful. So you really have to adapt to the situation but at the same time be consistent overall in how you manage people.
So let's say we have someone who's a first-time manager. They're moving into a new management position and they want to do a great job. I'm sure nobody goes into a management role and wants to, totally flunk out at it. What are the things that you would kind of coach them on in the initial going? Is it self-awareness is right where we start?
Yeah, I mean, you need to know right out of the gate where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are, so you know where to lean on your team.
And do you feel like people intuitively understand their strengths and weaknesses, or do you feel like they get these assessments back and go, oh, that's really interesting? Like if I don't have an assessment handy, which I know it's 2025, I can probably get on the internet and do an assessment. But like, let's say I'm just thinking like I'm a good communicator. I'm good at getting up and talking in front of people, good at building relationships. I'm okay at results. I'm okay at process. Like, is that good enough? Or would you recommend that someone like does an assessment of some sort?
Well, it's so, I mean, I always, even if you don't do an assessment, you still have to be regularly asking for feedback as much as you can, right?
Yeah.
Because there's a difference between self-perception and self-awareness. Self-perception is what I think about myself. Self-awareness is when I get feedback from others that matches what I think about myself and it confirms it, right?
Okay.
So in other words, we walk around thinking I'm a good communicator or I'm good at this. But if you haven't had other people tell you that, it's just self-perception.
Yep.
But if other people have told you that, and that's feeding why you believe that about yourself, that's true self-awareness.
And I got news for you. Having been in the HR world, everyone thinks they're better at their job than they actually are. Everybody thinks they're like the number one on the team when it's like statistically, I can say you are like the 8th best person on the team. We had a guy who was like, I'm the fastest worker in this warehouse. What are you guys talking about? And I'm like, I statistically can prove you are the slowest worker in this warehouse. Like, I'm that's just the numbers, my man. That's like arguing that you scored more points than Jordan. It's like, this is the stats based. Like, you didn't.
So
Sorry.
without being too judgy myself, I'm just going to talk about the we'll call it the participation trophy generation kind of thing, where a lot of parents are trying to be super supportive of their kids and telling them they're great at everything even when they're not, right? And that's okay. You're trying to build self-esteem. The problem is a lot of times when people get into the workplace, for the first time in their life, they're hearing hard feedback about what they're not good at. And it can be very devastating to them if they've not had any hard feedback prior to getting into the workplace. And they can think the person's being unfair or whatever, but because everything in their mind has convinced them that they're really good at almost everything they touch, right? The other thing to what you said earlier is a lot of people think they can do their boss's job on day one. They just don't understand they don't know what they don't know. They think they could go read a book and suddenly be a great manager. No, you have to make a lot of mistakes, and you have to learn from those mistakes in order to get better as a leader. And so a big piece of self, let's just say a lot of people are not self-aware. In my book, there's actually a study that I refer to that talks about that 95% of people think they're self-aware, but only 10 to 15% are self-aware, right?
Okay.
And so when you think about that as a statistic, even if it's moderately correct, you have more than 50% of your population coming in thinking they're better at things than they are, like the example you gave earlier. And the only way you can confirm that is consistently and constantly asking for feedback from others to really determine what your strengths are and where your opportunities to improve are. And if you have any kind of fragile ego and you can't hear that feedback, you're going to grow much slower in your career than anyone else, because you're going to be making bigger mistakes. People who are not self-aware are 6 times more likely to have major career failures at some point, versus people that are highly self-aware. And so you need to be doing everything you can to verify what you think your self-perception is accurately what other people are seeing. And that's through asking for feedback. And then when you ask for feedback, you have to always respond positively to it, or you'll never get that feedback again.
Well, yeah. I mean, I know some people like that's a really important one. I mean, one, it's hard for a leader to get feedback just as it is, right? Because if I'm the boss, it's like, which I deal with this at our company. I'm founder and CEO. And like when I ask people, how am I doing? They're like, you're doing great, dude. You're doing awesome. It's like, guys, like, I'm not going to terminate you if you say, like, sometimes I'm a little long-winded or sometimes I'm maybe not focused. Like, I want to hear it, but it still is really challenging. But I do think you just hit on something really, really important, where I know people that when you try to give them legitimate feedback, they go into attack mode. And it's like, it's not even attack about work. It's about, like, your girlfriend's unattractive or something. It's like, dude, whoa. Like, we had a joke. We had a guy that we played soccer with, and we had a bunch of English guys. So, they'd call it like taking the piss, or, you basically just are like, doing what guys do. You're joking with each other. This guy couldn't take it. Soon as you would say something to him, he would just like 10x what you said. Like I said, your girlfriend's ugly, and like, you're just like, whoa, dude, like too much. Like, you don't.
By the way, anyone listening to this that doesn't know what taking the piss out of someone means in English in England, you should know it's making fun of each other, teasing each other. It's not literally going to the bathroom. Just to get everyone on the same page.
You're doing gentle jokes. It's not like hardcore jokes. Like, you're very unintelligent. You're never going to be successful. It's like, whoa, dude. Like, it's like, oh, you're a dummy. You don't know the difference between this and that. But I have people that I work with where I have attempted to give them what I feel like is very reasonable feedback. I say, hey, look, there's a perception of this at the company, and they'll just go on attack mode. And when you get a person like that, it's instantly like, all right, well, there's really no reason for me to give this person any more feedback, because it's just going to descend into like terrible chaos. So I think that's really important that you hit on that. If you're receiving feedback, you just got to be like, thank you for that feedback. Even if you're like, this is stupid, this is totally untrue. Just need to kind of like take a step back on it.
And that's a big piece of increasing your emotional intelligence, right? I would put money on it, and I don't know who the person was that reacted to you that way, and not that we need to even talk about that. But most people that have that kind of a reaction, their reaction is based on their past.
Mm,
In other words, in their past, they probably had a very harsh critic that would get on them all the time and they felt attacked, right? And so emotional intelligence is about knowing that when that person is doing that, it's not a real attack. It's just a perception and whatever it is, and you can respond to it. But if you're conditioned to get really harsh feedback from someone and you feel like you have to defend yourself because you're feeling attacked, fast forward 10 years from that person that may have been doing it, every time you get into work in a situation that's very similar where you're getting harsh feedback, your brain goes back to the previous person and when you needed to defend yourself. And now you're jumping in defense mode. And that's how the brain works, right? We're conditioned. We have these old programs in our head from a lot of times childhood, and they pop up at the wrong time. So more often than not, when someone's having a reaction like that, it has less to do with the feedback they received and more to do with their own history of getting feedback and how they developed a pattern of needing to defend themselves in those situations.
And I think that with that particular person, it was, I don't want to say a fragile ego, but they were maybe not secure in themselves. So like
Mm-hmm.
when they were getting feedback, it felt like it was like almost maybe like a confirmation that I'm not good at this thing and I cannot accept a confirmation that I'm not good at this thing. Do you see
Yeah.
that that's an issue for a lot of people, that they're not secure in their position? Maybe you just got promoted and you're trying to prove that you're great at this. And because of that, you refuse to accept feedback because you feel like someone's coming for my job.
Yeah, it's learned behaviors. When anytime someone feels that way, more often than not, it has to do with their history more than the situation in front of them. They learn over time. I need to watch my back, or I can't trust anybody, or whatever it is. They bring that into the workplace, and next thing you know, they're out for their own career, and they're quietly screwing other people or doing behaviors that are all about promoting themselves
Mm,
at the cost of others.
mm,
Those are the leaders that'll inevitably have career failures earlier in their career because
mm.
they just don't get that the only way you're going to be successful as a leader is to have all of your team be successful, make them feel valued, and making sure that you're creating an environment that they want to work in, or you're going to end up seeing high turnover and you're going to end up failing as a leader anyway because your high performers are going to leave.
Yeah, and just fear of being vulnerable at all and admitting like, yeah, you know what? I'll be honest, like I'm not great at this particular thing. Because I think people fear that like if I admit in a meeting that I am not, you know what? Look, I'm just honestly not great at like spreadsheets. It's not my skill set. That people think like, oh, well, we shouldn't promote Alex because he's not good at spreadsheets.
Well, the concept that we need to be great as everything is ridiculous, right? I mean, we every one of us we're going to have weakness. It's not about being great at everything. It's knowing what you're great at and
Mm,
knowing what you're not, and creating workarounds for the things that you're not great at. Right? I mean,
mm.
if you know those things, you could do something about it.
Yeah.
But if you
There's
don't have self awareness, you're just going to keep making the same mistakes or make bigger mistakes that are more costly.
Yeah, there's a story about Larry Ellison, the founder of Oracle, that he was putting all these mandates in place at the company, but then he wasn't following up to ensure that people actually were like following through. So he told the pricing department, like, hey, we need to have a set price all across the world on this particular thing. But then he'd send that mandate to Germany and they go, well, what do the people in the United States know about pricing? So they'd set their own price. And then the same thing would happen in France and the same thing would happen in the US. And they were just spending all this money on these like consultants doing pricing studies in each individual area when he's like, I already told you guys what the price is supposed to be. I'm the founder of this company. So what he discovered was he just wasn't good at like kind of following through with particular things and ensuring that people were doing the things that he was asking. So he hired, I don't know if it was CEO or a COO, but it's just like a process and results person that just came in and laid the hammer down. And eventually, I think it was the COO because they eventually became the CEO. It was a woman. And she just was like, my job is just making sure the things that Larry Ellison wants to happen at the company happen. And she's like, it was actually, not that complicated because I knew exactly what I had to do. Larry wanted to get these 10 things done at the company. My job was to get them done at the company. And I thought that was really interesting because he just realized, like, oh, I'm the bottleneck because I'm not good at this thing. So I just need to put someone in place who is good at this thing. And it sort of solved it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good example of knowing and leveraging someone's strengths. You know, if he brought her in because she's really good at those kind of things, then he's leveraging the strengths of those individuals. That's the other thing too that we didn't talk about this much yet, but one of the most important things you do as leaders really learn your team's strengths and give them opportunities to leverage them as much as possible. Because one of the big mistakes leaders make is when they put together a development plan for their team. The development plan for each individual includes working on the three things that they suck at, right?
Mm,
Who in the world is going to be excited about a development plan if all you're getting them is to work on the things they suck at?
mm,
So development should be about giving people a chance to shine and give them a chance to build their strengths. And in general, when you look at people's careers, the most valuable thing you can do in your own career is either work on making your strengths stronger or work on making your weaknesses just a little bit less noticeable, right? So that they're not holding you back. So if it's like a fatal flaw that's going to cause you to fail, you want to make it to the point that it's not so noticeable. But all the research should suggest that the biggest career advancement and moves will come from building your strengths and learning to leverage them to the point that, when someone has one outstanding strength, and this was a Harvard Business Review article by Folkman and somebody, but in any case, what they found was if you have one outstanding strength, meaning if everyone in the company rated you on it, they would say you're a 5 out of 5 on it, right?
okay.
If you have one outstanding strength, if you have zero outstanding strengths, you're usually rated in the lowest third of all leaders. But if you
Okay.
have one outstanding strength, you jump to the top third of all leaders. If you have
Okay.
two outstanding strengths, top quarter of all leaders, three of them would get you in the top 20%. If you have five outstanding strengths, you're going to be in the top 5 to 10% of all leaders.
Mm,
And it means that if the whole organization recognizes you for three or four strengths, your career is going to take off, right? And you'll be seen as a
mm,
great leader. But if you have no outstanding strengths, you won't. And so
mm,
if you are really thinking about it, you're thinking, what are the things I'm good at? And how can I find ways to leverage those for this organization and improve on my ability to do those things? Then if you put together a development plan that maybe has them working on one weakness, but working on two of those strengths, they love developing because they're working on things that they already are great at and or getting better at. So, or
mm.
that they have passion around.
Yeah, that's interesting. So kind of leaning in on the things that you're really good at and trying to find avenues at the company to be like, look, I think I'm good at communication. Uh, I want to make sure that most of my day is spent communicating with the outside world about our business and what I do, like pitching our business, selling our business. And if I can
Yeah.
do that, not only am I going to be happier, but I'm going to be more successful.
Well, and it may not be in your job description. You may have to go pitch it as
Yeah.
an opportunity. Like I'll give you an example. I worked for one very large organization that I knew the COO was on the same floor as me. I put together a pitch for the first time I met him. I just started working there. He didn't know me. My job did not include strategic planning,
Okay.
but I wanted to do it. So I see him walking down the hallway one day. I go over, I introduce myself. I give him the pitch. I tell about how I've done it in the past, how it makes it easier for him. And it was 1 minute long, 2 minute long. And then he said, well, nice meeting you. He shook my hand. He walked off. And I didn't think anything of it. 2 days later, I get a phone call from the regional CEO. So it was the COO that I met. And his admin calls and says, I need you to come up to the CEO's office. And I hadn't even met the CEO yet, right? I walked in the door and the COO is standing right next to him and says, this is the guy I was telling you about. And long story short, 2 days later, I'm in the process of planning the strategic planning for the entire executive team.
Mm,
And I facilitated the process for them. And that was the region. The region had 50,000 employees in it. So I facilitate this session for them and it's going really well. And in the middle of it, the worldwide CEO walks in as 150,000 employees under him. And the regional CEO says to him, hey, this is a guy I was telling you about. You should use him. And
wow.
next thing you know, I'm helping the worldwide CEO do strategic planning. It was not part of my job, but I created a pitch for it. And I knew I
Mm,
had a strength that the organization could use. So how many times, are the listeners to this program, thinking I have a strength that isn't currently being utilized?
hmm
And they figure out a way to pitch it in a way that makes it part of their job. And then
mm,
now you have an ability to have an outstanding strength that people can use.
I love that. What are some other resources that you think that someone who's maybe going to enter this management world could be beneficial for them, whether that be books, trainings? I know you can work one-on-one with you, of course, but What are like kind of the just start here sort of things for a low level manager?
Well, I mean, there's so much out there that's available. I would say for anybody, the first thing they should be doing is picking up resources on emotional intelligence,
Okay.
and in particular, ones that help them build it
Got it.
and understand it. Because, you know, as AI and technology advances take over more and more of our technical parts of our job,
Oh
the
yeah.
people
Okay.
the people that stand out are going to be the ones that are really good on the people side of the job. You
Mm,
know, because if you become less dependent on your own technical knowledge, because advances or AI has kind of taken that over, then you what are you left with, right? It's my ability to get things done through others, and
yeah.
that's through relationship development, and a lot of that has to do with emotional intelligence. I mean, the book that I wrote was for that purpose, right? It's
Yeah.
called Leadership Accelerators, and it focuses on three things: helping people increase their emotional intelligence, helping them identify the communication habits they have currently that might be helping them and or holding them back, and finding ways to overcome those habits. And the third thing is your ability to know how your personality strengths are helping you and or hindering you, and how your personality weaknesses are helping or hindering you. So if you focus on those three things and become a high self-awareness around how you communicate with others, you are going to stand out as a leader, because those are the things that are going to be most important for getting people to want to work for you, to want to follow you, and to be able to handle those moments that matter. You know, that's the critical thing. When you're in crisis, when you're in an argument, if you can demonstrate emotional intelligence and demonstrate that you care about others, regardless of what the situation is, you will gain trust and improve your relationships if you handle them well. So really, I always say to people, going back to what my dad did before me, right? 35 years ago, you know, the same thing was happening. That's what's happening now. It's just more accelerated now, which is people are getting fired because of communication mistakes. And
Mm,
so what can you do, regardless of whether your company is currently providing the training or not? What can you do to become a much stronger leadership communicator, improve your self-awareness, and improve your emotional intelligence? If you focus on those things, it's going to pay dividends in the end. Just know that it doesn't happen overnight, and you're going to have to work at it daily, really, to make progress.
yeah. I was just looking, trying to find a quote that I just read. I like uh, rolled over and read it to my girlfriend, and it was something along the lines of the people that end up succeeding are those who, when the situation is the most stressful, they can stay calm and make the correct decisions. Essentially, it might have
Yeah.
been like, Sun Tzu Art of War or something like that. But basically, the people who can be clear thinking at all times are the people who end up winning.
Yeah, and I've seen some incredible examples of leaders in moments of crisis saying just the right thing in the room to get people to see the crisis as an opportunity as opposed to a thing to be afraid of, right? And the greatest example I could think of is the CEO of a company that I worked for. We had just lost our biggest client,
Hmm.
and he had a room full of 40 senior leaders that were in a leadership program that I was, you know, co-facilitating. And he walked in the room, and the first question that was asked to him was, "What do you think about us losing our biggest client?" And the client was giant. And the first words out of his mouth were, "It all depends on whether you saw that client as a vital organ or a tumor. I personally saw it
Mm,
as a tumor."
wow.
And then
Yep.
he went on to describe how that client was sucking up all our resources and all the problems for that client. And he said, "I believe by them leaving, we are going to find another giant or big client that will replace them. That will be much better for us." And within months, our second biggest client that had already left because this big client was stealing all our resources came back, and they became the
Mm.
big dog, and they were a much easier client to work with. But he said the right thing at the right time, and made everybody kind of, you know, be relieved of the situation as opposed to panicking about
I'm going to put that one in my back pocket for the day that one of our big clients leaves.
it.
Michael, this was a lot of fun, man. Where can people get the book or catch up with you, kind of hear the things you're doing, see the things you're doing, or work with you kind of one on one or at their company if that's going to be something that's beneficial for them?
Yeah, I mean, I have my own business, leadership development consulting, and Delisser Leadership Consulting,
Yep.
and I have a
We'll
website.
link to it, of course.
Yeah, yeah. So delisserconsulting.com, or you could just do delisser.com, and it's Delisser. My book is on Amazon. You could do a search for Leadership Accelerators with an S at the end, Accelerators, and it's available on Amazon. I have a YouTube page that I take snippets from podcasts like this, and they're all just little lessons that you can learn and apply. And that's Delisser Leadership Consulting YouTube page. And you can go to my website and have a direct link to both of those, either the YouTube page or LinkedIn. And I regularly, if you connect with me on LinkedIn, I regularly post leadership articles, communication skills articles, usually at least one a week. And you go back in my history, you'll see hundreds of them. And I also post brief snippets, that you can watch in a couple of minutes and pick up on a few things. So, but you're welcome to reach out to me any of those ways. And I'm always a resource available. Even if people are just looking for resources, I can point them in the right direction. Over the years, I've come up with quite a library of resources. So.
Awesome. I believe that. Thank you, Michael. This was a lot of fun. Really appreciate it. And I think you got some great stuff out there for everybody who wants to eventually become a manager or a leader.
Well, thanks for having me on. I mean, my ultimate goal is to help people improve their relationships and the results. And doing podcasts like this gives me an opportunity to have that kind of an impact. So thank you.
Absolutely. We'll talk soon.